Westland media, the Lake Oswego Review, Westland Tidings, that kind of stuff. I'm not going to talk much about him. I'm going to let him talk a little bit about himself and introduce our speaker. Patrick, I'm turning it over to you.
Thanks, Tom, and thanks everybody for having me today. It's great to be back and doing some stuff with leadership. I kind of missed out. We missed out on it at the end of last year when the pandemic hit. Our class kind of got thrown for a loop there. So it's good to see some familiar faces and some new faces too. But yeah, I'll try to keep this short before I introduce Brian. So my name is Patrick Malee, and like Tom said, I was part of the class last year, and so when we started leadership, which I believe was at sometime in like near the end of 2019. It's hard to keep track of time at this point, but I was pretty new still to being the editor at the Lake Oswego Review at that point. So for me, leadership was really, really beneficial in a number of ways. In terms of just learning a lot about kind of the fundamentals of leadership and the thought processes behind it, and kind of challenging myself to improve my leadership, and also just in terms of meeting a lot of people in the community that I wouldn't have that I hadn't met yet or that I didn't know as well yet, and really kind of building some bonds that way, which is really important, in my work and I think in everybody's work. So I was really thankful to be a part of that, and I'm thankful to be here again too. And so I will just pass it off to Brian now, who is the publisher at the Review, and also the vice president at Pamphlet Media Group. Brian is a much better authority on a lot of the the dynamics and business side, especially of the news industry, than I am. So he'll be able to kind of give you an overview of what it is that we do and some of the dynamics behind that. And so yeah, without further ado, I will introduce Brian Monihan.
Thank you, Patrick. Appreciate the opportunity to be here. You ever hear me okay? Good.
Yes.
Yes, Patrick said, I serve as vice president and publisher for the Lake Oswego Review. I've actually been in Lake Oswego for, it's hard to believe, almost 20 years now, or actually 20 years. I was part of Lake Oswego leadership back in 2001. And much like Patrick's journey, I joined because, the chamber twisted my arm and said, "You've got to do this." And I was glad they did, because it really helped me get ingrained in terms of the dynamics of what's going on in Lake Oswego. It helped me establish great relationships within the community, and I made some really great friendships going through leadership at Lake Oswego. So I really appreciated the opportunity, and I commend you all for stepping up to take part in this process, because it will pay big dividends, not only now, but also in the future years to come. So a little bit about, in the past when I've talked to leadership like Oswego, we've tried to focus on kind of the role of the media or the Review and how we try to serve the community from a leadership standpoint. And so part of what I was going to share today was I've got a PowerPoint that's going to walk people through kind of what's going on with the Review and media today, talk about how media has changed, because it's changed dramatically since I started my career back in 1987. Back then, it was really, when I sold advertising for the company, we had three options. We basically sold the newspaper, but the three options that our clients had to buy were radio or TV in addition to print. Now they've got hundreds of different options in terms of where they can place their advertising dollars. So it makes it that much more challenging for us in terms of how we do our business. not only in terms of how we sell, but also how we get the information out. So that's kind of what my presentation will cover this morning, and then open for questions at the end. So let me, if I can share my screen, we kind of practice this with Liz this morning. So hopefully I can get this done correctly. So Liz, is everybody seeing my full screen? Yep, get a big thumbs up. Looks okay, Patrick. Okay. All right, so let's cruise through this. In terms of how we try to serve the community, media, like I said, has changed a lot, and there's a pretty big difference between what I feel like a local media company does or the Lake Oswego Review does compared to like the Oregonian or even local TV or even national. So it's hard in terms of when I talk to people, there's a pretty big misconception sometimes as to who we are and what our role is in the community compared to Fox, CNN, the Oregonian, New York Times. And so part of it is trying to explain to people there is a difference in terms of how we try to serve the community. And so again, it's trying to figure out, trying to explain to people what our role in the community is. And so today we'll kind of cover some of these aspects, but as you see on this is just some of the stuff that we've covered in the last year, everything from drive-through graduations to the wildfires to, the cover on the right is where our local police was getting their injections for COVID. But, again, the question a lot of people ask is what's our role in the community? And is it being a community watchdog in terms of showing up at city council meetings or school board meetings and making sure we're holding city and the school district and other government officials accountable for what they're doing? Or is it, celebrating community milestones? I mean, if you grew up in a community like Oswego, you had the benefit of a really strong local newspaper that did actually cover state championships and high school graduations. If you grew up in Portland per se, the Oregonian doesn't really cover high school graduations, and you're not going to get the kind of coverage we're going to give you in terms of celebrating that milestone where we list every kid's name in the newspaper and run a majority of their photos. The same as with a high school graduate, like a high school sports championship. My methodology is if a sports team wins a state title in your community, that should be front page news, which is the example that we did back in 2018 when LO won the state football title. Some communities, man, you're lucky if you get a story in the daily paper to cover it, and that's your only story for the whole season. But for us, we try to do a special section highlighting those achievements, whether it's football, volleyball, soccer. I mean, again, you've got to play. To me, that's one of our roles is celebrating those milestones. The other thing is, that question people wonder, are you the voice of the people? And so we do this in a couple of different ways with our opinion pages. One is providing letters to the editor, which during election times, if you are a follower of the Review, you'll know that sometimes we're running just pages and pages of submitted letters to the editor where people in the community want to share their thoughts on who people should be voting for. I think the record in one issue is 76 sticks in my mind. Patrick would know better. But sometimes we've got so many letters, there's not enough room for even news to run. But the other thing that we try to do is offer our own opinion, and people always question, well, why should you offer your own opinion? Well, especially for elections, sometimes we have a front row seat to see how obviously existing people are working in government, or we see them behind the scenes in terms of our relationships, or watching them. Maybe they're a city councilor, maybe they're running for mayor. So we have a better observation as to how they're conducting business or how they interact with their fellow councilors. So there are times when we do want to share our thoughts and opinions as who we think should be elected into office. And doesn't mean we're the definitive answer. Obviously, we make mistakes, and sometimes we get them right, and sometimes we get them wrong. But again, it's at least giving people in my opinion, sometimes hopefully a more authoritative thought process in terms of offering opinions as to who should be elected, or why you should support a school bond, or why you shouldn't support a school bond or a city bond. I mean, again, it's us trying to provide that additional voice for people to understand an issue. And this is the only place within the whole newspaper that you should ever see us editorialize or share our opinion. It's on the opinion page. You know, that's what it's for. That's why it's called the opinion page. But we really try to use it to be more the voice of the people, so we can share other people's thoughts and comments, and we don't hold stuff back in terms of, you know, people question us and say, well, why you only show or run certain letters to the editor? Well, in fact, we try to run all the letters that we get. It would not be fair of us to hold back ones and that maybe we didn't agree with, and we don't do that. I mean, again, it's our credibility on the line. So if you submit a letter to the editor, to Patrick, for the most part, it's probably going to run unless it's got some significant issues in terms of libel or just untruths, and so that's where we try to be fair about pushing those out. But we do try to be the voice of the people. A lot of people question, ask, are you just there to highlight local events? And obviously local events is a key part of what people look for within our newspapers and websites. So again, when it comes Festival of the Arts, the Lake Run, Lake Oswego Reads, basically any community event, we try to highlight that because we know that's a real critical element to what people want to read or know what's happening for the coming days so they can be involved in their community. The same is true in terms of being a community cheerleader. I think part of what we want to do is support local business, or in this week, you might have saw the full page ad that we did in partnership with the city, the school district, and the chamber. Thank you, Liz, and the chamber board. But just to thank the community as a whole for stepping up during this most recent windstorm to take care of each other. I mean, again, nobody else is really going to do that to the extent that we can in terms of pushing this out and bringing people together, and to thank the community as a whole for, again, watching out for one another. That's what community is all about. And to me, that's really an important role that we try to provide. Because again, if we can build community through our news, through our different medias, and create that cool sense of why you belong to a community, it actually strengthens all of Lake Oswego. So a big part of what we try to do is try to be a community cheerleader. Part of that too is supporting our local businesses. I mean, I think in December we rolled out this campaign called Shop LO. It was a 5-week campaign where we tried to encourage people to get out there and support their local businesses by spending, in this case, it was a 5-week campaign, so it was based on spending a certain amount of money on the weekend based on whatever the date of the month was. It was just kind of a different twist on a shop local. But again, we're trying to remind people how important it is to support their local businesses. And again, nobody else is stepping up to do that unless it's us or the chamber on a consistent basis. And so again, if we can help facilitate that and support our local businesses, my thoughts is it's going to hopefully come back to support us because, we've tried to take care of them. And, a big part of what we do is trying to provide the living history of our community. The review became 100 years old last August. It's quite a milestone to reach 100. Unfortunately, due to COVID and everything else, our ability to celebrate that was pretty muted in terms of being able to make a big deal of it. I still plan to figure that out at some point here, but we've kind of got to work through some other issues. But in terms of, being 100 years old, theoretically, you can look back at you should be able to go back to any newspaper, whether it's in the 20s, the 30s, the 40s, you'll get a snapshot of what was happening in Lake Oswego at that time. And it really is, we provide a living history of the community that, again, if the review were to ever go away, that's gone forever. You're not going to find that on Facebook. You're not going to find that on any other place. Again, a history that shows, in the past, weddings and engagements, but also businesses opening, businesses closing, highlighting lives well lived, telling the stories of how people survived, whether it's a fire, a wildfire, or a snowstorm. You'll get a snapshot from any newspaper as to what was happening at that time. And that's, again, really valuable history that you won't find anywhere else in the community. And, as I mentioned that when I started to talk, there are so many different opinions of what people have of media today based on their own personal interactions. As I welcome new city managers or new school district superintendents to the community, which I've had my fair share in the last 20 years, every one of them has had either a positive or a negative experience with the media. And so part of what Patrick and I try to do is paint a picture that we are a little different than other media. It's a little more personal to us. We live and work in the community that we cover. So if we're going to take somebody to town that on a topic, we need to make sure we are fair and balanced on how we approach it, because I'm probably going to run into those people at Safeway, or I'm going to run into them at concerts in the park, or going to see them at Festival of the Arts. And I've had those uncomfortable conversations where somebody is really not happy with something that we did. And if I can be fair about how we approached it and make sure they weren't surprised, then it makes it that much more easier to have those kind of conversations, because again, it's more personal to us. For papers, for bigger organizations or media companies, they can swoop into town, take a community to task for something, and then swoop out, and they have no really ramifications other than making people mad. They don't have to live with it. We have to live with it, and that's why it's more personal to us. And in fact, our owner lives in Lake Oswego, so it's personal to him. And so again, I try to treat everybody like I would want to be treated myself. Sometimes we hit the mark, sometimes we miss the mark, but honestly, we don't purposely try to take somebody down without making sure that they've had their side of the story shared, and we really try to practice that, because again, we are a small community. It's a cool community, it's a great community, and we want to keep it that way. And sometimes you're going to agree with what we publish, sometimes you're not. The challenge for us is that every week we're producing, or every day now, something new that unfortunately we're going to make somebody mad whether we intended to or not. And our intent is never to purposely upset anybody. We really just want to get the news out and inform people about what's happening in Lake Oswego. If we can do that, then we've really hopefully created a stronger community, because people are more engaged and more aware. But because people can get their news from so many different sources these days, thousands in fact, it really has made our job much harder. And to be honest, I really do think it's hurt the community. And I see it kind of happening all the time in terms of local elections. I see it happening on social media with fake news being pushed and broadcast locally. I mean, even on the national stage, stuff that we see happening nationally trickles down to local politics, and people emulate that. And it really is scary in terms of sometimes things that are pushed out there on social media with no checks or balances, and it just continued forward. So part of my talk today is also explaining when media is weakened in a community, how it can hurt the overall community. And in fact, here's some local examples of stuff that's happened based on social media, and Google and Facebook increasing what they do in terms of owning the market in terms of local advertising. I think it's 90% of all advertising now runs through either Google or Facebook. And so there's not a lot left, unfortunately, for the rest of us. And because of that, it's really weakened the ability of some of our other media in Oregon. And so some examples in terms of local stuff, you've got the Portland Mercury, who, thanks to COVID and also Facebook and Google, had to go to just an online product and stop producing a printed newspaper last year. You got the Register Guard, which is a family-owned product down in Eugene, actually sold to a national company last year, and now they've got a quarter of the news staff they had, and the newspaper's a shell of itself. The Oregonian, I'll talk about them in a sec, but again, combination of a focus on online only, or pushing people to online, trying to get everything to digital first, combined with COVID and some other challenges, has made the Oregonian a different newspaper than it was 20 years ago or 30 years ago when I started, and I'll kind of go over that next. But the Bend Bulletin's another example of a great local newspaper, was family owned, went through multiple bankruptcies, almost actually closed last year until the community actually rose together and fundraised some money, and then went after or encouraged another media company called EO Media to jointly buy with these community members the Bulletin. And so we really saved that community newspaper as a resource for Bend and Central Oregon. And without that community support, the Bend Bulletin probably actually wouldn't exist today, or would be owned by a group somewhere else. I think the other offer came out of a group out of the South, which had no understanding of what Bend was like or what the paper should be like. But because of the impacts of social media, COVID, Google, here's kind of a quick snapshot of kind of what's happened with the Oregonian. Back in 2002, they had a paid circulation of the Sunday Oregonian of almost 450,000 subscribers. Today, their paid circulation is just under 70,000. If If you look at their daily readership, again, back in 2002, they had almost 350,000 daily subscribers to their newspaper, and now it's down to 50. Again, the Oregonian is a good paper in terms of they're trying to do a good job. They have a significant digital footprint, but the challenges they face are significant, and they can't be as nimble or as local or provide different news you can't find anywhere else, which is our kind of unique advantage. But it's, I've taken my share of lumps from the Oregonian for the majority of my career. They lived and breathed to put me out of business. So, previous management at the Oregonian were no friends of mine or my family, but kind of gotten over that now. I feel bad for them. And collectively, we do need them to stay around. And I think they will, but it's not easy. So especially when we see declines in readership that like they're seeing with their newspaper. And so what's the effect on a community when the local media is weakened or goes away? What does the community lose? Lose the ability to tell stories about what's happening at City Hall, school board decisions, to share those stories about hometown heroes, local veterans, touchdown scores, or lives well lived. Again, if it's not the local media telling those stories, obviously big media is going to sweep into town when anything significant happens and cover those major events, but it's those other smaller stories that you're just not going to have anymore. And what people don't realize, there's different aspects of cost that affect cities when media goes away. So this is from a research done in 2018. Actually, there's an NPR story that validated this as well. That talked about how when a city loses a local media source, the insurance rates for the borrowing of money for like local bonds is increased because the insurance companies realize there's not a watchdog overseeing that community any longer. So the rates don't go up significantly. It was like 0.01 or 0.03%. But in terms of a bond that's $100 million bond for multiple schools, that's $100,000 in costs that have to be shifted from supporting other things to support the interest costs on a bond. So it was interesting to see that there's a cost ratio when a local community loses its media source, that it does cost the city more from that standpoint. There's also the likelihood of corruption, and when a media is weakened. So this is a good example. And why do I have the Westland Tidings up here? Because this is the Westland Tidings from 2018, and you see on the front cover the story. It was written actually by Patrick about the Westland police chief and 2 officers being named in a suit. Well, we broke that story again back in 2018, and I had my first interactions with Chief Timius back in 2001 when he accused one of our Lake Oswego, he was I think a captain or lieutenant at Lake Oswego. He accused one of our reporters of making up a bogus statement that we published in the newspaper. He made a snarky comment about something, and our reporter published it, and he said we made it up. But that was my first interaction with Chief Timius. We also did 2 exposés on his experiences working undercover in Portland, and we think those came out in like 2008 and 2012. Well, he eventually became the police chief in Westland, which many people realize. But in 2020, back in February, so about a year ago, suddenly the story broke that we broke in 2018, that the suit was settled and the city of Westland paid a gentleman $600,000 to settle that suit. Suddenly, the whole world went crazy in terms of how could this have happened? How did we not know? Well, the Westland Tidings had the story 2 years previous. The city council was aware of it. The city manager was aware of it. If they had maybe taken it more seriously at that time than what they did, could all the embarrassment that West Lynn dealt with, back, just in the last year in terms of the image problems, if they had addressed it immediately at that point versus, 2 years later when they had to pay that settlement, could have been a different outcome for how the city was perceived or how the police was perceived as well. So again, I think it really goes to show that, even though we have strong papers in all our communities, if the community isn't engaged, it really does hurt the community as a whole. The other thing that happens, and you saw it really showcased in the most recent election, is how communities become polarized without the loss of a source to share opinions. And you really saw it in the last election where you've got, different tracks of people hearing only what their social media streams are sharing. And so with the loss of a newspaper in a community, where theoretically you've got differing opinions on the editorial page and you can hear both sides of an issue. But with social media these days, Google is all about, or Facebook's all about making sure that if you like something, it's going to share more things that you like. So if you like a certain political slant, it's going to make sure it feeds you more and more of that slant because they know you like it and they're going to give it to you. And it's going to help them in terms of selling more advertising because it gives them more eyeballs. I think what happens then is people get in this tunnel vision in terms of they're only hearing people with their own views sharing opinions, and suddenly you don't get that balance in terms of, there is another side of the story. It's always interesting to me because I listen to, when I'm driving, I listen to both NPR and KXL, and I can hear the same topic covered on both stations in very different ways. But at least it gives me a balanced approach to kind of what's happening and allows me to think about it from both sides of an issue. And I think there's not enough happening right now. So when communities become more polarized because they're not hearing multiple sources talk about things, it does create diversity, and it really does bring out more negative elections. And we see that year after year in terms of local elections when they get nasty in terms of different rumors that get started and shared through social media. And it's not just in Lake Oswego. Westland's a classic example of that too. So again, the challenge for us is numerous in terms of how do we continue to be relevant for the next 100 years. And, our challenge is again, part of it is making people aware is that local news has a value. And if local news wasn't around, who would be trying to do all those things that I just kind of walked people through? Again, some of it's going to be covered on Facebook by, Facebook's Facebook groups. And, the sad thing to me is you've got all these administrators who manage these Facebook groups for free for Facebook, generating countlessly millions of dollars for Facebook and not getting any compensation for it whatsoever. But they feel it's their community goal to administer these Facebook groups, which is great. And to be honest, those Facebook groups really did well during the most recent storm. We monitored those for ideas and updates as to what people are talking about in their neighborhoods. So obviously it works, but again, I've also seen those things break stories that aren't legitimate, and Patrick has too. One example was, a woman posted that there was somebody who had just broken into her house. This is actually in Gresham, broken into their house, and her husband was chasing this person down the street, trying to catch him. Suddenly, the stream of story or the comments that flowed after that Facebook post was talking about, wow, how, it used to be that this was a safe town and this kind of stuff never happened. And you saw these comments after comments talking about how sad that situation was and why it happened and how could it happen. When the paper, the Outlook, finally looked into it, they found out that really what had happened was the person who broke into the house was their daughter's boyfriend. The parents weren't happy with the fact that he had snuck into to their daughter's bedroom through her window, and to kind of teach him a lesson, posted on Facebook that he was a burglar and tried to embarrass him from that standpoint. Did that come out after the fact on the Facebook post? I don't think it did. But it wasn't until the paper looked into it to realize that that wasn't really how it was portrayed on that Facebook group. Again, it challenges everybody's ability to really know what is truth and what isn't. And we see it with multiple posts on those kind of things where people bring up things that either just aren't accurate, aren't true. And again, people are more aware now, I think, than ever because of fake news and people only trying to hold people accountable. But it's really hard when you've got, thousands of people posting on things to catch everything. But again, to me, there's a cost every time we have to send somebody to cover a city council meeting or a school board meeting or a high school sporting event. And that cost in terms of personnel, printing, distribution, it literally adds up to $250 per story. So when a business calls me and says, hey, can you come out and do a story on my business? A lot of times we want to do that. But, when I ask them if they would like to advertise to help support us, they're like, no, you're going to write a story. I don't need to advertise. Well, they don't quite get the fact that I have to pay somebody to do that and I have to pay to distribute it. and there's a hard cost to that. So a big part of what we're trying to do now is educate the community that we're not a charity, we are a public service, but there's a cost to what we do. And it's reminding people that if you don't pay for that, whether it's in terms of advertising or subscriptions, that we're not going to be able to provide at the level that we have in the past. And so how do we continue to do what we do? And be unique and different. It's being the community's best source of local news, and not just for news, but advertising. And as I mentioned before, there's multiple ways to get that messaging out there to people. And so what we try to do is package everything we do into multiple medias to get the word out. And even doing so, it's still hard to reach everybody. But in this case, what we do in Lake Oswego is we have the review, which is now both a print and digital product. We've seen significant growth in the review, especially on the digital side. We're now up to almost 3,400 digital subscribers that are paying actually to get the digital paper sent to them, or paying for our content online. We also started in the last year a weekly newsletter, which highlights kind of the top 7 stories or 10 stories of the week, which is approaching 30,000 digital subscribers to that weekly newsletter. We also have our website, which is almost reaching 12,000 people a day. That's the number of people who are coming to our website to find out what local news we have. We also have our Ella Monthly magazine, which is read by over 20,000 people every month. And we have our Facebook page, which we also use to highlight our stories, which has about 5,600 Facebook followers. So what we try to do in terms of both news and advertising is utilize all these aspects to get the word out there. And even doing so, it makes it a challenge. But the reality is again, with people having thousands of choices in terms of where to get their news, we have to figure out how to put it out there in as many ways as possible in the most read local news streams, whether it's the most read local newspaper, website, email newsletter, or magazine, or Facebook stream, but packaging those all together to get the content out there to hopefully reach people. And even doing so, again, you all have your own different media habits and how you get your news, whether it's through your phone, through your computer, through the TV. But again, it's us trying to get it out there in as many ways as possible to reach as many people, to hopefully inform, engage people. And I think when we do that, we can be relevant in terms of how we serve the community, which really that's what it comes down to. We want to serve Lake Oswego. We really firmly believe that if we do our jobs, it makes this life, or makes people more aware of what's happening at City Hall, in our schools, in our business community. And if we can do that, if we can better engage our readers or our community in that standpoint, we create a more informed, a better educated community who then, it can make better decisions when it comes to voting, or make better decisions in terms of what's the best course for our community. It's when people don't have that information and they don't have the ability to find it easily, that's where, you have more challenges in our communities, which I already outlined. And again, that's what the leadership role is that we try to provide in the community. We really do want to serve. We just need to figure out how to continue to drive that support so we can serve our communities even better. So, and part of that in terms of how we do it from a leadership standpoint is, maintaining our local partnerships. Again, when it comes to supporting community events, I try to sponsor almost virtually every community event that we do, because I know that's what brings people together. As I mentioned earlier, I've been in this business for 30 years. When I came out of Forest Grove after being the publisher there for 10 years, I didn't know what to expect of Lake Oswego. Unfortunately, I grew up in Beaverton, went to Jesuit High School with a bunch of guys from Lake Oswego, and some of them weren't the nicest kind of guys. So I had honestly a bad opinion of what Lake Oswego was before I got here, but I was immediately surprised to find out what an awesome community Lake Oswego is, what a tight-knit community is, what a caring community it is. And I think, unfortunately, Lake Oswego gets a bad rap out of a lot of media because it's an easy target based on the affluence and assumptions people make. But I'm the first to try to debunk that and really say Lake Oswego is a special community, and it's because it is a community. It's got a character in terms of people really care, people get involved, and it makes it fun running the newspaper because we get immediate response, both positive and negative, when we do things. And so sustaining that is really important to me and to our company. And so we want to continue to support the community in every way we can. But part of that challenge is, again, based on COVID and everything else, what's happening in the economy. Our staff is working working 4 days a week. Initially, we were only 3 days a week, so our staff is working limited hours. So our goal is, once the economy starts coming back, to bring our staff back to full time. And we can do that either through selling more advertising or getting more digital or more subscriptions. We can then start to bring people back, which allows us to cover more news happening in the community, which is our goal. We also, if you realized early on, we made some drastic decisions with COVID in terms of how we had to change how we produced our newspapers. We went to producing zones. So for a while, you got a newspaper that said Pamplin Media Group South Zone, which was a combination of news from Lake Oswego, Westland, Wilsonville, Clackamas, Oregon City, and even Estacada. We've been able to roll some of that back. We still do a lot of what we call common pages in terms of news from all over the county, but we try to continue to localize the papers as much as we can, which is why now the paper says Lake Oswego Review on the front, which we want to stay true to. But we can only do that, again, with advertising support and subscriptions. So that's why we're continuing to push that in hopes that we can continue to make the papers more local. And really then it comes back to just diversifying our revenue streams, generating more revenue. I mean, it's all about the money, and that's where people always wonder, what does the publisher do compared to the editor? Patrick's job is to make sure that we've got the best content possible related to our communities, and it's either in print or on our websites. My job is to make sure that there's funding in place to support Patrick and to help him have more reporters to cover that stuff. So I try to watch the advertising side of it and just the health of the paper financially to make sure we can sustain what we want to do in terms of serving our community. And part of what I try to do, since I've been here too long, is make sure there's some historical background in terms of what's happened in the past, and make sure our news team is aware of those kind of things and the role that different people have played in the community over the years, so we can make sure that we don't miss those kind of stories as well. So, and then the other benefit that we have as a company is the fact that we have local ownerships, and Dr. Robert Pamplin and his wife Marilyn live in Lake Oswego. They care greatly about our publications and all our newspapers. We actually have 25 newspapers serving all of Oregon. But without their support, to be honest, these papers probably many of these papers wouldn't exist any longer. He's very committed to the importance of local news and the role we play in serving our communities. And without their support, honestly, we would not be, many of our papers would not be here today, and some of our papers would be half the size of what they are right now. So we're fortunate to have that kind of support and ownership, and again, he's setting us up to be around for the next 100 years, and we're very fortunate because of that. So yeah, so that's basically, I'm gonna stop sharing. That's basically, kind of who we are and how we try to serve Lake Oswego. I'm open for any questions. Liz, I do okay? Yep. Okay. So,
Brian,
I can say one
I'm not sure who's talking.
here.
Is this Amy Valentine?
This is our review, part of the review. Anyway, we have been for 24 years. 24 years. Yes, from Dino's Pizzeria, and we have been using your newspaper, and we love it. We've been in the community for 42 years, and our business 24 years, and we thank you. We really appreciate it. You guys do an absolute fabulous job. So,
Well, I appreciate those
Just wanted to
comments.
let you
It means a lot to us, and we appreciate your support over the years as well. So,
I just wanted to say too, I moved here from Redondo Beach, California, used to the LA Times 7 years ago, and you're the only paper I pay for in any format I can find. And we
Yeah,
just love it. Our daughter's a cancer survivor, and we were in your monthly magazine. And it was just amazing, neighbors and community. I love that you highlight neighbors and community in special, more in-depth ways. But I love your newspaper, and everything's spelled right, and your quality is so good. I won't even pay with the Oregonian because I'm so annoyed. But thank you for letting everyone share and being such a core of the community. We appreciate it.
I appreciate you saying that. Patrick can attest to the challenges that it is in terms of making sure we have everybody's name spelled correctly. And, when you produce something or create something new every single day, every week, there's a lot of opportunities for human error. And I know our team works really hard at that. And obviously, you can't be perfect, but we try really hard. So I appreciate you saying that. So thank you.
Hey, Brian, it's Mark. I have a question for you.
Yeah.
So when we get to the next phase and things open up and we get this pandemic behind us a little bit, what are the one or two things you're going to focus on to continue to improve what you guys do? And I agree with the prior speakers. You guys are awesome, and you know how I feel about you in the paper and stuff. But what can you do if you had more resources? What would you do? Maybe that's my question.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest priority for us right now, to be honest, is high school and local sports. That's kicking off in the next week or so. So we had to lay off all our sports reporters back in March a year ago. And so what we're trying to do, priority one, is go out and secure basically local sponsorships by community to try to, again, fund those sporting positions. Because even though the economy is going to improve, unfortunately, it's not going to just flip a switch and it's going to be back to normal. And so for us, we've got to kind of set the bar now in terms of growing that sports coverage and making sure we've got some kind of sports coverage, really setting us up to really go full bore back, hopefully, into it in the fall, when hopefully it's, back to a regular season, a regular sports schedule. But for right now, that's probably priority one, is getting some kind of limited sports coverage back. I think two, we've talked a lot about just trying to serve the community. So I would love to bring back, somebody who could be focused more on local business stories, more local feature stories, or just the event type stuff. I mean, right now, with our team working limited hours, if I could get them to full time, that would actually open up more possibilities for each of them writing a couple more stories a week, which we could then again do a better job of just providing more local news. My fear is that people are going to give up on us in terms of having the patience for us to not be what we were previously. And, that's the challenge overall, because I would love to say we're going to be back to where we were, in the next coming months, but it's literally going to take us probably years to get back to that stage. And a lot of it depends on the community in terms of how local businesses survive and their ability to advertise and their ability to utilize us, which is, sometimes a real challenge in this digital age. So.
Thanks. We're rooting for you.
Thanks. Appreciate that.
Yeah.
And I appreciate Mark's support. I got to give Mark a lot of kudos. He's somebody that I try to emulate in terms of his leadership style. Mark and I served on the chamber board 10 years ago. And, his calm, cool approach to how you attack things is something that I've always appreciated over the years, Mark. So I appreciate you very much. I saw somebody else raising their hand, but I'm not sure if I'm seeing everybody.
I've got a question for you.
Yeah.
Hi, Anastasia. Media literacy, do you have any resources where folks could become a little bit more aware of the importance of media literacy and how to teach children how to be critical thinkers and what kind of information they're getting online?
I mean, one thing I would love to do that would kind of help facilitate some of that, and just in terms of just engaging kids in terms of being readers of newspapers, is a thing called Kid Scoop, which is a service that we could theoretically run a newspaper which has weekly topics in terms of engaging kids. It's a great way to help them learn how to read, but also be more aware of what's happening just on different national topics. But it's one way to bring kids back into the newspaper. With limited resources, we, for years we ran a thing called SWAG, Student Writers student writing group, which was basically high school kids who would meet with one of our reporters or two of our reporters each month, and we would allow them to talk about different things happening in the community from their perspective. And so it really helped engage a younger voice within our readership, which all the readers appreciated hearing what high school kids had to think about, either national things or just things happening at the school level. But whatever we can do to try to engage those younger readers, that's a big part of what we want to continue to do, is set the table for future readers. And so those are the two of the things we've tried to do over the years. We also for years ran a thing called Student All-Stars, where we recognize kids who excel in the classroom compared to the sports field. So honoring kids for student government, band, choir, to highlight those kids, and again, creating different avenues to get kids to be more engaged with what's happening in our community, or just reading what's happening in the local paper. The surprising thing about Lake Oswego is how many kids, because I have 5 kids, they're all now a little older than high school, but it was always interesting to me how, when those kids would be at my house, even at high schoolers, how many of them said they loved to read their local paper, especially the number one thing was always the police blotter. So kids are, Lake Oswego and Westland is a great community in terms of engage, and it really follows through with kids especially. And partly why we create a thing called Amazing Kids is as a section we do each year to highlight those kids as well. So again, engaging kids is an important part of what we do, but we also want to celebrate those accomplishments, and hopefully we can do that through our education coverage, and our sports coverage. Long-winded answer. Did I answer your question? Okay.
Brian, I just want to echo some of the comments that people have made about how appreciative they are of the newspaper. And I know when I was working for the school district as the foundation director, you couldn't have been better. So thank you very much. You just gave us tremendously great coverage and helped in all our campaigns.
Well, I appreciate you saying that, Mary. One thing that, part of Leadership Lake Oswego helped me establish or understand, which I knew all along, but it really validated it being in Lake Oswego, is the number of community partnerships that we kids set up with either the school district, the foundation, the city. I mean, again, if I tell the city all the time, if you've got an important issue that you want to engage the community about, please utilize my voice, and not just our stories, but utilize our social media streams, our websites, our newspapers, and I'll cover half the cost if it's going to help encourage more people to get involved, more comments to come through. Because the more that we can engage and create people to be part of the community, again, it just helps the community as a whole. So I appreciate you saying that, Mary.
All right, let me kind of reinforce what Mary just said. And you've just done an exceptional job of leading and handling the adversity that you've dealt with. But I go back 27 years as superintendent, and we always benefited from the review. Even when we screwed up something and you covered it, we needed those messages out there, and our community does read that paper. And so I felt very, very, very supported by you, even though you would cover something that I wished you didn't have to cover, because you covered it well. And the only time I had an issue with a person, they didn't last very long under your watch, which I thought was a huge plus. But you've done a great job. The review is a very important part of our community, and thank you for your leadership and being as good a leader as you are.
I appreciate you saying that, Bill. And likewise, I think when I came to Lake Oswego, I really, to this day, I still echo some words that Bill told me when we met. And that was the fact that, Brian, if you do your job, you make my job significantly easier. And that really comes back to if the review does our job well. Because again, if we can get the information out correctly and timely to people, it does make the school district's job that much easier in terms of not having to re-educate people to deal with false things or just the rumor mill. The same is true with the city. And I think we and to part of that too is I wish we were perfect, but we're humans, we make mistakes. And so if you don't agree with something that we published or think we missed the boat, I'll throw Patrick under the bus. He's more than happy to talk to you. But again, I think we you know, we want to do it right. And sometimes, you know, it's, again, we're only human and stuff happens, but I always appreciated the times when Bill would come to me and say, hey, Brian, this is a complicated issue. Can we meet with your news team and talk about it to make sure you get it right? Over the years, you know, the city would do that on complicated bond issues. Again, we want the last thing we want to do is put a story out there that's not accurate. It's our credibility on the line. I personally feel it if we make a mistake, and I know Patrick does too. So we really strive hard, but we can only do it when we work collectively as a community. And that's why it's not just my paper or Dr. Pamplin's paper, it's the community's paper. You help us make it what it is. And we really do have a special community for a lot of different reasons, but a lot of it has to do with the unique partnerships that exist between all the different entities, the schools, the cities, the chamber, the media, you know, Lake Oswego, the Lakewood Center for the Arts. I mean, there's these pillars in the community that step up to do so many things. And, you know, it's sad sometimes to think that there's a segment of the population who just doesn't get that. And kudos to you all for taking this class. It will open your eyes to all the unique things that make Lake Oswego, you know, an awesome community to live and work in. So.
Well said.
Thanks. Christopher.
Absolutely, Brian. I think that, as you know, I'm always fond of hearing you talk, and I think you do a great job. But this time, it just really struck me how indispensable the paper is to the identity of a community. And not only that, how well you've done in navigating that, because a paper is always going to be indispensable in the way that you've discussed, but it very easily could become a left or a right or any other kind of paper. The fact that your paper has done such a good job in its role, I think, is up to you and your staff. And so just echoing everybody's comments on how fortunate we are.
Appreciate you saying that. So because I wear a sales hat all the time and everything I do, so if someone's not a subscriber to the Lake Oswego Review, all you have to do is go to savinglocalnews.com to subscribe. We have some great offers out there for everybody. And of course, if anybody wants to advertise in the paper, I'm happy to talk to you. Or if anybody wants to be one of our sports sponsors so we can fully fund a sports position, I'd be happy to talk to you as well. So. Anybody have any final questions? Are we good, Liz? I'm getting a nod, yes.
We are good. And Patrick, did you want to have any final comments before we move on to our next segment?
No, I think that we've covered everything. I thank you to everybody who well for listening to us, and for if you subscribe, for subscribing, and for the kind words. And like Brian was saying earlier, I do my door is always open. So for anybody who has any questions or story ideas or complaints or anything that we're doing right or wrong that we need to know about, I always want to know. So you can reach me anytime.
Great. Thank you so much, Patrick and Brian. And we are going to transition over to the Bill Korash section. So thank you so much again. And Bill, all yours.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. What I want to do is start by focusing on, okay, you got 2 pages that are pretty packed with perspectives on process thinking and readiness. So let's look at that little visual. You know, I always try to give you a visual to start you thinking about what's coming up with this next set of leadership perspectives. And so when you look at that visual and think about the readiness is all, and that we can't know what's coming at us, what the future will hold. But one of the things that you can improve in terms of your readiness is your ability to think and address whatever's coming your way. So when we talk about readiness right now, your ability to understand how you think, what's going to be the avenues that you take when you have issues that are problems or great promising opportunities? How do you approach it in terms of the mode of your thinking that you're going to use? Because how you think about something is a huge difference maker. So when we look at these 2 pages, the way I'm going to come at it is it's about your ability to continue improving how you process and how you think. And so I kind of use a overarching label and say process thinking. In other words, something's in front of you and you got to deal with it. So how do you process it? How you process it is going to make a significant difference. And you have the ability to improve that by understanding different modes of processing and deciding which mode of processing something is the right mode at the right time. Because if you try to process it in a way that really isn't the right way to get the most benefit from the experience, you're going to be less successful. So essentially,